What's up, everybody? Matt Gajewski here, back again with the Stochastic DFS channel. Today, we are talking college football DFS ahead of the Week 12 Saturday main slate. Before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when this and all other content goes live. We're also brought to you by Prize Picks. They have a first match deposit bonus up to $100 when you use the link in the video description below. They're also giving you one free month of Odd Shopper. Tons of tools on there, spreads, totals, player props, which will help you directly with Prize Picks, a player prop-based site. Again, this is for new users. Link below. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem, please call or text 1-800-GAMBLER. Must be 21 or older to play. All right, I'm a little behind. So the way we do this show is we run through the DraftKings main slate, followed by the FanDuel main slate, and then do top fives by position. I am done with projections, the first run at least, and have not checked the top five values. So let's see if my intuition has some congruencies with the projections. We will find out. But let's kick things off with the DraftKings main slate. Some of these games might be out of order. Totals are updated as of Thursday morning. We will begin with Oregon taking on Arizona State. Bit of a lopsided one here, 24-point spread in favor of the Ducks. Total is 53.5. Oregon still has a massive implied team total, nearly 40 points. This team is 84th in pace with a 53% pass rate. Arizona State 59th in pace. They're passing the ball about 56.5% of the time. Bo Nix is going to be a hot topic on this slate. He's still playable because of Oregon's massive team total, but he's priced as if he's in a shootout with Washington or USC. So he's going to be a little bit difficult to get on this slate. If you can find the salary to get up to him, I think it's completely fine. Again, I haven't gone through the entire slate yet, but assuming we find some value, I think Bo Nix is playable. He's not running as much as he did last year, but still averaging 308 passing yards per game on just 33 attempts. Arizona State's defense definitely doesn't scare you. So Bo Nix, I mean, there's not much to say. He's in play for tournaments if you can ever get to him. In the backfield, Bucky Irving needs to be pushed to reach a 20-carry threshold. We've seen plenty of games, even without Noah Whittington, who's out for the season, where Irving doesn't reach this target. But Arizona State, they've played some competitive games. Bucky's still a decent tournament option because of that massive ceiling. And if they reach their nearly 40-point implied team total, he likely has something to do with it. Also extremely involved in the pass game. He's averaging 4.3 targets per game and another 31 yards through the air. So Bucky, good tournament play. I don't really like playing Jordan James behind him. Some people take this approach, but he's pretty expensive. And I still think you're looking at a pretty bad floor if he doesn't fall in the end zone or something. In the receiving game, one player who hasn't really been that affected outside of the last game by negative game script, I guess it's not really negative game script. It's actually really positive game script that turns into a negative, but that's Troy Franklin. Outside of the 3 targets in the last game, the dude's been an absolute monster regardless of opponent. 109 receiving yards per game. I still think he's a worthwhile spend up. There's a lot of really good receivers on this slate, so I'm really curious where he's going to come in the projections. But I mean, clear number 1 stacking option with Nix. Number 2 is Tej Johnson, who's coming off back-to-back games where he had 13 and 11 targets. Pretty good play. He's very expensive. I think you can go down if you want to roll the dice on like a Gary Bryant again. I've been rolling these dice all year long to no avail. He's like premier wind sprinter on this team. Like he's out there so much, but he just can't earn any targets. So I don't know. I'm kind of at a loss with Gary Bryant. I'm going to play 150 tomorrow, so I'm sure I'm going to sprinkle him in there just for cheap Bo Nix stacks. But the guys behind Tej Johnson and Troy Franklin, you've got Trayshawn Holden, whose routes have been pretty bad. 27%, 49%, 36%. Bryant's been at 76, 62, and 70. I don't know. I'll probably chase again, but hasn't worked out yet. Then the tight end, Terrence Ferguson, he's actually pretty involved. His route rates kind of hover between like 55%, but he's been up at 80 in certain games. So I don't hate throwing a dart on Terrence Ferguson either. Bryant and Ferguson would be the cheap stacking options I look at with Nix. On the Arizona State side, this team is almost a complete X out. Their implied team total is barely above 14. Trenton Bourguet doesn't run. He's only averaging 192 yards per game. The Oregon defense is good. Pretty tough to click his name. He's also not like, he probably would have to be like 5K for me to play him. Then we get to the backfield. We're looking at the return of DeCarlos Brooks. He's been hurt most of the year, but when he came back the first time, they almost put Cam Skativo and DeCarlos Brooks in a 50-50 timeshare. So not really interested in Skativo. In the receiving game, this team did lose Xavier Gulleroy, so we've seen a changing at receiver a little bit. Nothing that's affected Badger. He's still the wide receiver one, and pretty clearly so. Route rate hasn't dipped whatsoever. He was at 98% last game. But we've seen the emergence of Troy O'Meara, the Texas receiver. Route rates north of 82% in 3 straight games. This team's inefficient, so the targets have been all over the place for him, but he's coming off an 8-target game. I have no issues playing Troy O'Meara at 3,100. He does open up a ton of salary. So for those of you that look at salary savers, he's immediately one to gravitate towards. And I would just straight up rather play O'Meara over Melquan Stovall, Giovanni Sanders, tight end Jalen Connors, who's running an absurd. 37% of the routes in the year, it hasn't gotten any better for him. He does draw a lot of targets when he's out there. Really athletic. They'll give him carries sometimes, just not on the field enough for me. I guess before we move on and before I forget, if you want access to this data sheet, player projections, ownership projections, we have it all. And college football still has a ton of slates left. If you're worried about that, think about bowl season when there's games almost every single day. We still have rivalry week, conference championship week. I'll be manning the ship for all of that, projections, ownership projections, and these data tools. Links below, but take advantage of that. We've been having a lot of success and fun this year. And if you'd just like to support, that's the best way to support my work. And if you've done so, thank you. I really can't tell you how much I appreciate it. Game 2, we've got Utah taking on Arizona. 1-point spread in favor of the Wildcats, 45 total, which leaves a lot to be desired. But both teams are pretty slow. Utah 116th in pace. Arizona is 85th. Utah 40% pass rate. Arizona is at least interesting with a 54% pass rate. But this team total is really low on Utah. I don't have a lot of interest, I won't lie. But the Arizona defense is also very bad, which needs to be noted. They're horrific. They're just in pure shootouts. But can Utah play like that? We've actually seen them remain competent recently in some games, but I still think their players are hard to get to. Bryson Barnes, just not exciting whatsoever. He does run a little bit, 223 yards, but who priced him at 7.2K? I will not understand. He's just flat out not in play on DraftKings, I think, because of this. He's only averaging 150 passing yards per game. The backfield, if you could guarantee me Jaquindon Jackson wasn't going to limp off, I would have a lot of interest in him. But he re-aggravates his injury every single year. They've been asking questions, press conference questions, if they're going to shut him down for the year at some point. I don't know, just a lot of risk to take on a guy who's clearly playing through a high ankle sprain. They've also been using him in a 50-50 committee with Jalen Glover. I'd honestly have more interest in playing Glover at 4K flat than getting up to Jaquindon at this point. And then the receiving game, it's basically Devon Vele and Money Parks running routes on every single drop back. They're priced efficiently. You're not getting a discount on either of these guys. Vele's been way more efficient. That's priced in at 5.1. Parks has been really inefficient, just 26 yards per game, but 4.1K. I'd rather just play Troy O'Meara at 3.1 or something like that. The routes have come way down on Mikey Matthews, Landon King's in a timeshare at tight end. Sion Vaki, we didn't mention him with running backs. His route rate is decent, 4 targets, but he's playing 20% of the snaps right now. He's a starting safety. How much can you really ask from Sion Vaki? Otherwise, it's a pretty big mess. Munir McClain's on the field a little bit. Not really too interested in any Utah pass catchers, to be honest. It's a really tough team to click. Arizona, I love this team, especially in better matchups, but the total's really low. I don't think anything, or at least I should say, I don't think highly of this Utah defense, which is good metrics. Good metrics against bad teams, middling metrics to poor metrics against good teams. So I don't know, but Fafita could probably get it done here. Eclipse the team total at least of 23. But still, do you want to pay 6,800 for that? He only has 2 rushing yards. He's not doing anything on the ground. You're kind of just banking for a 300-yard bonus and maybe multiple scores at this price, which seems unlikely given the team total. So pure GPP option is Fafita. In the backfield, pricing is starting to become a little more accurate for Arizona. It was inaccurate for a few weeks because Michael Wiley's been battling an injury, and he's playing through it at this point, but can't even play a full complement of snaps. He has 6 touches combined, 6 carries combined in the last 3 games. And he did play last week. You see the 0 carries, the empty cell. He played a handful of snaps, just couldn't play because of the ankle injury. So it's been Jonah Coleman, who is the preferred pass catching back, but splits early down work with DJ Williams. DJ Williams is a 0 in the pass games. It's still tough to click either of these guys. I guess Williams at like 3,200. He's in line for around 8 carries. Falls in the end zone. That would look pretty nice. But still, I think a lot of opportunity costs with him. Receivers, pretty easy to dissect this. They only use 4 guys. Jacob Cowing, Ted McMillan, Montana Lamonius Craig round out the 3 wide receiver sets. Tanner McLaughlin's their tight end. I mean, Montana Lamonius Craig is really cheap. The guy's averaging 4 targets per game over the last 4. He has at least 4 targets in 3 of those 4 contests. I mean, he's another punt option. But for contrarian spends, McMillan's averaging 85 yards per game. Cowing, he's been on and off the field lately because of injury, but still garnering 9.7 targets per game. I think both of them are fine for tournaments. They're going to be behind some other guys in terms of raw projection, I believe. Michigan taking on Maryland, 19-point spread in favor of the Wolverines, 49.5 total. Another beatdown spot for Michigan before they go to their game of the year against Ohio State. Team's really slow, 132nd in pace, really run heavy, 40% pass rate. And my goodness, last week against Penn State, just completely playing with their food. They didn't throw a pass in the second half. I'm pretty sure they had 9 pass attempts the whole game. Maybe that was just passes that actually made it to receivers. But man, I don't think you can play J.J. McCarthy probably until the Ohio State game. And you definitely can't play him in the Big Ten championship if they make it. You're probably looking at like this game and maybe in the bowl game playoff if they make it where you can play McCarthy. Just not enough volume. 171 rushing yards in the year. He runs when games are competitive. They just have not been that. And he's really efficient as a passer, but he still only averages 219 yards because they throw the ball 21 times per game. Backfield, you can play these guys, Donovan Edwards and Blake Corum. Corum was the real beneficiary of that playing with your food situation. 26 carries for Corum. Route rate's fine for him too. They just don't throw a lot. So a contrarian spend, Corum makes sense. You could throw a dart on Edwards. Still just a change of pace for this team. And they didn't use any other backs last week. When they blow teams out, they will. So just be aware. And speaking of these receivers, man, like Roman Wilson, their wide receiver 1, did not even receive a target against Penn State. Just unbelievable. But I mean, 6.4K, I don't think you can spend on him. Loveland and Cornelius Johnson are a little bit more palatable, but we're still talking about guys averaging below 4 targets per game for Michigan. So just pure dart throws at best. Nothing beyond this. Even AJ Barner, he had the 1 9-target game. That was 3 games ago. Hasn't seen more than 1 target in any of the other 4 most recent contests. Maryland, they have an implied team total of 15. So despite being really fast, 34th in pace with a 59% pass rate, I don't have a ton of interest, especially with Tagovailoa at 8,100. We'll get to some better games, I promise. Just the quarterbacks in these ones are a little lackluster. It's kind of like Bo Nix Island until we get to the better ones. Tagovailoa has good volume, but he's averaging 278, doesn't run much, so you're kind of reliant on a 300-yard bonus, which seems highly unlikely against Michigan. Backfield, same thing. Do we really expect Roman Hemby to get it done in this game? He's averaging 51 yards. They've played far weaker competition, and he hasn't. They also will mix and match Antwain Littleton and Colby McDonald certain games. Last game they didn't, but we've seen plenty of contests where they have. So the workload I don't think is secure for Hemby either. The receiving game, I don't think any of them are cheap enough to throw a one-off at. The main 3 receivers are Jayshon Jones, Ty Felton, and Caden Prather. Corey Dykes has played a ton lately since he came back from injury. Honestly, he's the guy I have the most interest in. Target counts of 10, 9, and 6 over the last 3 games. That's 8.3 targets per game in that span. His efficiency isn't too far behind the receivers either. So for me, it's just pay all the way down or kind of ignore Maryland altogether. Rutgers, Penn State, once we get beyond this one, it gets a little more intriguing. 20.5-point spread, 41 total. Just saw Rutgers get shut out to Iowa. Times are tough. Implied team total of 10. I don't think this requires much explanation. You're not playing Rutgers, guys. You would have to be getting really off the board in the biggest of tournaments to play Wimsat, Monangai, any of the receivers. The best volume is coming from Monangai. He'd be a really contrarian bell cow spend. For what it's worth, they do run a ton, 39% pass rate. But you're also running into a Penn State defense allowing 2.3 yards per carry. Just not enough touchdown equity, even at that price. Penn State, man. Drew Aller, we'll see if the OC change can help him out. He's been terrible. 196 yards through the air per game. Runs a little bit, but man, pure game manager. Really bad game environment. The team total is 30, so it's good, but it's still not even approaching like the Oregons of the world. And there's far better games, I think, to look to. Rutgers also has a good defense, should be noted. Backfield's a 50-50 committee. Like better matchups generally to target these guys. Nick Singleton, Katrin Allen, there's almost no difference in opportunity between them, even in the pass game. They're always going to be contrarian darts, hoping one of them gets all the touchdowns or something like that. The one-off play I am interested in is Keandre Lambert-Smith. The volume's just been so good since Harrison Wallace went out. 9.5 targets per game for him over the last 4. 65 yards. You are reliant on Aller, but he's targeted so much. Otherwise, Dante Cephas unfortunately saw his price hiked all the way up to 4.9K. He's been the very clear wide receiver too. His route rate was north of 90%. I'm finding the salary for Lambert-Smith if I'm making that click on a Penn State pass catcher. All right, I always like to check on the stream, make sure it's still running so I don't talk about something for a long time and not be recording. But we are good, still live. Louisville, Miami, starting to get to better territory. This game is a pick-em. You'll see Miami +1 in some spots. It's bouncing just basically between 1 on both sides. 46.5 total. Both these teams are slow. That's why the total's so low. Louisville's 111th in pace. Miami's 101st. Pass rate for Louisville's 44%. Miami's 50%. These offenses are explosive, though, so I have more interest in this game, honestly, than any of the last 2 we talked about. Jack Plummer, 8,700 is a very steep price tag for a pocket passer with 30 rushing yards. He's only averaging 240 through the air. It's nothing against him. He's been hyper efficient, just has 27 attempts per game. Where we can target Louisville, I think, is their skill position players. Jawar Jordan, man, even with a hamstring injury, the guy's just balling out. Miami does play good defense, and they're particularly strong up front, but we saw Jawar just ball out against Notre Dame. I mean, there's been no stopping this guy. Another week removed from the hamstring, you'd maybe think he gets closer to like the 20 touches he was seeing per game prior to the injury, averaging 98 yards per game on the ground. Amazing receiver as well, another 19 yards through the air. I never hate a contrarian Jawar spend. Jamari Thrash missed the game 2 games ago, returned last time out for 4 targets. But I was actually encouraged with the route rate for Jamari Thrash. We know this player is just an absolute baller. But you look to the most recent game, 68%. Pretty decent. Hopefully another week removed, he can climb closer to like the 95% he was seeing before that. So contrarian Jamari Thrash, don't hate that. He is very expensive. For reference, you can get some of the other cheaper receivers we talked about, like the Arizona guys are cheaper in a comparable game environment. So it's going to be tough to click Thrash, but for tournaments, go ahead. Otherwise, nasty logjam at receiver beyond these guys. Coleman, Bell, Callaway, Huggins, Bruce, Thompson, all rotating on the field. Miami, the return of Tyler Van Dyke is upon us. Somehow he doesn't have negative rushing yards, despite only 5 scrambles on the year and almost 0 designed attempts. But he's been efficient as a passer. The problem with him has been turnovers lately. It's why he got benched. 6 turnovers in the last 3 games, all interceptions. Maybe he has more fumbles. I don't know. But his passing numbers are pretty good, especially when you look at efficiency stuff. 231 yards per game on 29 attempts speaks to the pace of Miami. Tournament only, just because the rushing equity is 0. There are better quarterbacks, I promise. We'll talk about them. The backfield is like Southeast Oklahoma, man. Like Donald Chaney, Henry Parrish, Mark Fletcher, A.J. Allen. When they're all healthy, it's a complete logjam. It's sort of hard to talk about because, I mean, guys in this backfield miss games all the time, and there's very poor reporting. Cristobal basically is the same rhetoric every single week. He says every one of them is projected to play, and then like 2 of them are out. So my best recommendation is go look at the Miami beat, see who's warming up. If enough of them are out, take stabs on the players that are in, because Chaney's not expensive. Mark Fletcher is coming off the 23 and 16 carry game, but it's going to be entirely reliant on who's active. Allegedly, according to Cristobal, Parrish will be back, which is important. He led the team in touches prior to his injury. That would just make this a completely muddled situation, nearly impossible to target. Receiving game is very clear. If you want to stack this offense, Restrepo's the 1, George is the 2, Colby Young is the 3. It's very close between Restrepo and George. Targets, they do favor Restrepo, but efficiency favors George. Not a strong preference between the 2. These are just one-offs, and I think you could throw it at either. And I like what they did with Colby Young. It's an enticing price tag at 4.3K. He's averaging 5.5 targets over the last 4, so he'll be interesting. They also did a lot of 4 wide stuff last time out. Cam McCormick, he played, but his route rate was just stripped. You saw Brashard Smith play a fair amount. So for those of you just punting off salary, 3,400, I would still say Omier is the better play for me, but Brashard Smith, his route rate was at 59%, which isn't nothing. Again, that came at the expense of tight end McCormick. Oklahoma BYU, this is a game with more interest largely on the Oklahoma side because it's projected to be a beatdown. 24-point spread, 57.5 total. We have Dylan Gabriel, quarterbacking an Oklahoma offense ranked 13th in pace with a 46% pass rate. As usual, I think Gabriel is among the best quarterback plays on the slate. I am always prioritizing him in cash. I prefer him over Bo Nix. Higher implied team total, not by much, but he runs 337 yards. And I mean, just silly designed attempt numbers, the likes of which we've never seen in his career. He has 57 designed attempts, 21 scrambles, amazing offensive line that's only allowed 7 sacks all year. Just the floor with this guy rushing is unbelievable. It's not like Jaden Daniels, of course, but I mean, we've not had this throughout the career of Gabriel till this season, and BYU has a non-existent defense. No pass rush. As a passer, he's also averaging 306 yards. He's a walking 300-yard bonus. So Gabriel's a very good play, especially on DraftKings. He's a bit more expensive on FanDuel. The backfield, we just talked about Miami. It's the same thing with Oklahoma. See who's warming up. And this is even worse because they literally switch lead ball carriers every single week. Last 2 games, it's been Gavin Sawchuk. So you could maybe have a little more confidence in this, but Javante Barnes coming off the foot injury, slowly getting ramped up. Marcus Majors missed the last 3 games. He was the lead back most of the time prior to the injury. I still don't have a lot of faith in Sawchuk seeing another 22-carry game, but if you wanted to throw a dart on an Oklahoma back, he's the preferred option right now. We'll probably have more information at Live Before Lock. Receiving game, since Andrew Anthony went out, the only 3 receivers playing full-time roles are Stoops, Farouk, and Anderson. And they're not rotating hardly at all. You'll see Gavin Freeman, Jaden Gibson once in a while. And that's largely when they go 4 wide because Stogner has about a 65% route rate on the year. Stoops, Farouk, and Anderson are all over 90% routinely. Stoops has target counts of 14 and 13 in the last 2 games. I mean, he's beginning to become among the better receiving plays on the slate, which is wild to say because a lot of you know him. He's not a dynamic player, slot-only receiver. You have far more explosiveness in Anderson and Farouk. So you want to take your GPP shots. It's Farouk and Anderson. You're looking for a cash stacking option. It's Stoops. Still don't know if he's a cash option, but he's a good play, and he's the preferred stacking option with Gabriel for tournaments, a stack which I plan on being pretty exposed to. BYU's tough. We don't know if Slovis is going to return yet. I don't know if it matters. The offense stinks. Team total's not even at 17. Jake Retzlaff, he runs a ton more than Slovis, but he's just inept as a passer. So ceiling is very low. Slovis is the exact opposite. Decent passer, inept as a rusher. Can't play these guys. The backfield's fully healthy now. So we've got LJ Martin, Aiden Robbins, and Deion Smith, just full-blown committee. They've also involved Miles Davis, and most of his involvement has come via routes. Just cannibalizing the other backs. Can't play them. And man, this receiving game projects to get back Darius Lassiter. They're fully healthy, which is great for their team, even though, I mean, they can't get these receivers the ball. But look at what happened to their routes the last game with like Epps back and stuff. Here's how it went. Chase Roberts, 61%. Isaac Rex, 63%. You had Lassiter out the last 2 games. He had been at 89 and 84%. So again, I think it comes down off the injury. Marion was at 45. Parker Kingston was at 16. Cody Epps was at 58. And then you even had a couple other guys like Ethan Erickson at tight end, 32%. JoJo Phillips, 39. Talmadge Gunther, 24. And a lot of it's because they're getting killed and they're just evaluating talent now. And for me, I'm just going to pay all the way down if I have to, which luckily you don't. I would say like a Keelan Marion at 36, Isaac Rex at 4K. I don't know, man. Pretty tough to play any BYU players right now. App State, James Madison, a really good game for DFS. I don't know what it is about the G5, but whenever one of them sneaks onto the slate, they're priced pretty affordably. 9-point spread in favor of JMU, 56.5 total, good total. App State's 58th in pace, 47% pass rate, questionable defense. James Madison's 105th in pace, 49% pass rate. Really explosive offense. There's a lot to like. Joey Aguilar, pretty decent price-adjusted quarterback, averaging 264 yards per game, has 259 rush yards. That's solid opportunity. App State's 50th in pace, so you should see good volume. Just running into a brutal matchup. So Aguilar, he's a much better play than most of the signal callers we've talked about. He'll be in my GPP pool, but he doesn't grade out quite in like the cash conversation. Backfield, tough to play now that Nate Noel is back. When either Nate Noel or Kanye Roberts are out, it's a lot more palatable. And the only other thing with App State is they played a couple blowouts recently. So you're seeing guys like Amani Marshall, Anderson Castle, McQuell Haywood. They've been getting more work lately. The last two games, especially attempts 3 and 4, these are blowouts. So in more competitive games, I would anticipate this looking something like, 15 carries for Noel, 12 for Roberts, give or take on both sides. So you've got pretty good opportunity. The only thing that's a problem with Roberts is he's just a stone zero in the pass game. He almost runs 0 routes. They give those routes to Noel and some of these cheaper backs on the team. So Roberts, even at 43, you're still banking on him falling in the end zone a couple times. I also think there's an outside chance that Noel gets back to his pre-injury workload, which was like 25 carries a game. He's just been a lot more efficient than Kanye Roberts to this point. Receiving game, little bit of injury news. Christian Horn only played a couple snaps last game. Everything seems to indicate he'll be better and closer to 100%. Tough to know, but that's at least worth mentioning. He had been a full-time receiver prior to the injury and then only 9% of routes last week. The beneficiaries, Caden Robinson, 91% of the routes. You had Dalton Stroman at 61%, which was a surprise. And then that wide receiver 3 position's a pretty nasty rotation. I think the best bet is Caden Robinson's the 1 no matter what. Horn's the 2 if he's fully healthy. Stroman's the 3 he's good the 3 regardless, but he's a much better play if Horn is limited or out. They also rotate tight ends. Eli Wilson plays a bit more than like David Larkins and Miller Gibbs. But I think you can just solidify Caden Robinson in your lineups. He's the best price-adjusted play. There's no reason he should be cheaper than Horn. And Deshaun Davis, I didn't mention his name. He's rotating more than he had prior in the season. James Madison, great price tags on most of these guys. Jordan McLeod projects really well, even at an 8,300 price tag. Their team total is nearly 33 points. The App State defense is definitely suspect, especially on the ground. We'll get to that at the running back position. But McLeod's averaging 277 pass yards per game on just 30 attempts, hyper efficient, and he runs 310 rushing yards per game for Jordan McLeod. He's in the cash conversation. He's a very good tournament play. He's just straight up an overall awesome guy to target. The backfield is mispriced. You saw a changing of the guard. Kaelon Black, Tyson Lawton. Tyson Lawton is the feature back now. And it's crazy. I mean, the routes were absurd. We had 2 routes for Kaelon Black last week. 2 routes. 2-0, or not even 2-0, just 2 flat. Tyson Lawton has an awesome role right now. And let's play the hypothetical game. Let's say this goes back towards like a 50-50. Tyson Lawton's 4,600. In a pure 50-50 committee, he's a good projected player. If this continues his direction, which the last 2 weeks have been absurdly lopsided towards him, he's the best play on the slate. So there's a lot to like about Tyson Lawton. Also, the App State run defense is allowing 5.3 yards per carry. My goodness. Matchup sets up. Opportunity looks good for Lawton. He's in cash game consideration. The receiving room is very easy to get to as well. Reggie Brown, Elijah Surratt, and Phoenix Sproles. I think Elijah Surratt should be the wide receiver 1 in terms of pricing. You get him at a $100 discount behind Brown. The routes favor Surratt all season long. And lately, splitting hairs here, 10.3 targets per game for Surratt, 9.3 for Brown. And if you need a punt, Phoenix Sproles plays almost every single snap. He's not targeted as much as those guys, but still 5.5 targets per game at 3.6K. He's in the Troy O'Meara category of awesome values. Tight end Zach Horton, I would still rather just go down and play Sproles or find my way up to Surratt. Brown, also a good play for tournaments. I can't discount any JMU guys. Georgia taking on Tennessee. We have a 10-point total. A 10-point spread. 10-point total would be wild. 58-point total. Georgia, 117 in pace, 50% pass rate. Doesn't matter there. Explosive. Tennessee's 4th in pace, 46% pass rate. Georgia's Carson Beck is averaging 303 passing yards per game. The O-line is so good that he's only taken 9 sacks, so he's 100 rushing yards. He doesn't run a lot, but I mean, just he's kept upright so frequently. The occasional scramble here leads to positive rushing yards. Excuse me. Sorry, guys. I'll mute myself before I cough. Sorry, avoided catastrophe. It's the problem of doing a solo show. All right. Sorry about that. Running backfield. Also, I guess to sum up back, I always like him for tournaments. Good implied team total. Big ceiling with the 300 yards passing average. Great tournament play. Also, he's got Brock Bowers back, who we'll get to. Dewan Edwards continues to lead a committee with Kendall Milton. Roll isn't quite as good as it was prior to Milton's return, so 7,500 is a pretty steep price tag to pay. Milton also too expensive, in my opinion, just better running back options. Brock Bowers returned. He saw 4 targets. Let me tell you something that should make you feel even better about Brock Bowers. His route rate was at 83%. Brock Bowers is back in play. Now he's expensive. You get no discount on him, 7,500, but on FanDuel, he's 8K. Be playing a lot of him over there. Brock Bowers firmly in play. And what that did to the other pass catchers, you saw Dominic Lovett come in at 72% of routes. Ra Thomas was still at 66. Ladd McConkey at 52. I'm not really reading too much into that. They killed their last team. So Ladd plays more snaps when games are competitive. This is semi-competitive, so that's positive. Rosemary Jacksaint, 45%, and then you've got the rest of the players rounding it out. Honestly, I'm okay stacking any of those top 4. I would still prefer to get up to Bowers if possible, but Lovett's a good play at his price. McConkey, you assume he plays more snaps than the 52% or whatever. And then Ra-Ra's had pretty good role for 4,700. I'll play any of those top 4. Joe Milton, quarterbacks, the Tennessee offense ranked 4th in pace. His receivers are dropping like flies, but he does run a little bit, 301 yards per game, averages 228 as a passer. He's a little expensive for me. I'd rather find the salary for McLeod or something rather than play Joe Milton. Backfield's a 3-way committee. No real separation between Jalen Wright, Jabari Small, Dylan Sampson. The receiving room, I guess we got to talk about these guys because they continue to get hurt. Brew McCoy's out for the year. They just lost Dante Thornton for the year last game. Squirrel White and Ramel Keaton play every single snap. I think they're priced efficiently. And then I've been gambling on the Tennessee wide receiver 3 all year long, getting it incorrect. Last week, we saw the routes about 60% Webb, 40% Nimrod in the absence of Thornton. I would expect something similar. Both of them are 3,100. I think they're worthwhile darts if you find yourself in this price range. I would still rather get Troy O'Meara because you have no competition there. Wake Forest, Notre Dame. This game is a 24.5 point spread, and the total is 46.5. Wake Forest has a team total of 11 points. So get them out of the way quickly. They are moving to Michael Kern under center, and he has less mobility than Griffiths, so very easy to X that out. The only big news in the backfield is Damon Claiborne is questionable. I still expect them to use a committee between Ellison and Tate Carney, even if Claiborne misses. So, I mean, at best, 3-way committee. At worst, 2-way committee against Notre Dame. Nope, no thank you. You could get some cheap targets, but Jamal Banks is way too expensive at 6,800. Taylor Morin's the 2. Keyshawn Williams is the 3. Wesley Grimes is the sparsely used 4, and they've now been rotating in Horatio Fields and some other scrubs. I'm not playing any Wake Forest guys behind the 11-point implied team total. Sam Hartman is quarterbacking the neutered Notre Dame offense. He's too expensive at 7,500. He only throws the ball 26 times per game, doesn't run. You can play Audric Estime, 8K, but man, this guy's efficient. 99 yards per game on just 18 touches, good pass catcher. They don't throw the ball a ton, but he's averaging 2 targets per game over the last 4. I have no issues using Estime as a contrarian spend. In games they just absolutely blow teams out, you will see a lot of the backups, but Estime should have something to do with that along the way. The receiving room is a complete disaster. They lost their number 1, Mitch Evans. They did give a lot of snaps to Holden Stas. He's 4,500, so no discount here. And unfortunately, pretty nasty rotation. Chris Tyree, Rico Flores, Jaden Thomas is going to be back. Tobias Merriweather, Jaden Greathouse, their other freshmen. Walk-on lacrosse player Jordan Faison. If I'm playing one of them, it's going to be Rico Flores, and that's just solely based on the recent route rate. He's a high recruit. He's a freshman. Same thing with Greathouse, but the difference is you had an 81% route rate for Flores, whereas Greathouse was at 69%. So we're splitting hairs. But it appears Notre Dame has taken a long look at their stud freshman receivers, and you'd expect that to be the case in a blowout here. North Carolina, Clemson, 7-point spread in favor of Clemson, 59.5 total. So this is a good one. Great game to target for DFS. North Carolina's 11th in pace, 48.5% pass rate. Clemson's 40th in pace with a 50% pass rate. North Carolina, tough matchup. Drake May's expensive for the implied team total, but if you're looking for a contrarian pivot off of Bo Nix, off of Dylan Gabriel, he's right in this range. 276 yards. He's averaging 315 per game on 35 attempts. Drake May is the best quarterback in the country. I will never fault you for playing him. His DFS skill set is electric. Facing a tough Clemson run defense is Omarion Hampton. He's 7,300, but we just saw them completely double down on him. He had an amazing workload splitting time with British Brooks, but 32 carries to British Brooks' 1. His route rate was above 80%. I mean, you can play Omarion Hampton in any matchup with that workload. And then in the receiving game, Devontae Walker, another 11 targets. Oh, on Omarion Hampton, he had 9 targets. 9 targets for Omarion Hampton. Insane. That's 41 touches. Anyway, back to Devontae Walker. No discount on him, but he's the best receiver on this team, and he runs a route on every single drop back. He's averaging 100 yards per game in the small sample that is his season to date. Nate McCollum, only 3 targets in his first game back from injury, but pretty encouraged by the routes for Nate McCollum. I think they rise. And then from there, Bryson Nesbitt, he's been lining up out wide quite a bit. He has the tight end designation. But I mean, Nesbitt has 10 targets in back-to-back games. He's 5K. He gets the tight end pricing, but I mean, he's lining up out wide and in the slot more than the average tight end. So I'm fine with Nesbitt. I honestly think he's my second favorite pass catcher. It would be Walker, Nesbitt, and Nesbitt might even be 1 price adjusted. JJ Jones would be 3. McCollum would be 4, and it's just solely on the injury stuff. Hopefully he's a little better and plays more this game. McCollum is a much better play on FanDuel. 5,100 is absurd over there. You guys know how I feel about Cade Klubnik. They have a good team total, so contrarian Cade Klubnik's in play. 36 attempts per game, horrific efficiency, 224 yards, 98 rushing yards in the air for Klubnik. They almost never have him run. And he has an ankle injury, only 1 designed attempt last week. It was a big talking point on the broadcast if you watch the game. He's playing through something, so I don't think the floor is great from a rushing perspective. I'd rather pass on Klubnik. You also have a North Carolina pass rush, which is the strength of their defense. In the run game, predictably, we did see Phil Maffa outtouch Will Shipley. That came on the 35 carry game against Notre Dame, where he just nuked the slate at a very cheap price tag. Now it's not 50-50. It's like 60-40 Maffa. They'll both be involved. Matchups, decent, not good, not bad. I think you could throw darts on Maffa, especially at 57 compared to Shipley at 59, but both are in play. The receivers for Clemson are so banged up that it's actually kind of helped us consolidate opportunity. Bo Collins is the 1 in terms of routes. Tyler Brown's the 2. I think you could flip-flop them if you want. You've seen Tyler Brown on and off the field more because of injury. Brenningstool's the tight end, another 7 targets for him, but his route rate was kind of poor. And then Stelato's the 3, but they'll rotate Adam Randall on the field. Don't have a ton of interest in the Clemson pass catchers. It will be Tyler Brown if getting to one of them. UCLA, USC, a phenomenal game. Another game with great quarterback play, especially on the USC side. Unfortunately, bad defense has marred Caleb Williams' season. But 6.5 point spread, 65.5 total. Both teams really fast. UCLA is a little more balanced. USC is very pass heavy. Ethan Garbers is back at practice. I think he's going to start here. He's my favorite cheap quarterback. You've got him facing the USC defense. He's not a 0 on the ground, 77 yards. Averages 157 per game. He's been knocked out of a couple of contests. His efficiency metrics are middling, but that's good. I mean, we don't need him to be Dylan Gabriel out here. All he has to do is complete passes. USC's defense will do the rest. And the other little tidbit, Colin Schlee has not been practicing. So they use Colin Schlee a lot as the situational wildcat quarterback, sort of like, I don't know, Taysom Hill kind of, where you never want to play Derek Carr in the NFL. At least I don't, because, I mean, Hill vultures a ton of stuff from him. That's Colin Schlee. I don't think he's going to play. So that should solidify opportunity for Garbers. The only other wrinkle here is Dante Moore is also back practicing. I think they're just going to shelve him until next year, give him more live reps. He was skittish out there, to put it kindly, when healthy. He's their 5-star freshman. But Garbers is playing USC, and anyone playing USC I have interest in, especially at 6,400. Backfield's a 50-50 committee. TJ Harden operates a little more in the pass game, so he's somewhat intriguing to me at 4,900, but I still don't think I'm going to get there. Steele's a bit expensive for my liking. The best thing we can say about them is they're playing USC. However, I think the receivers are very nice. J. Michael Sturdivant has an awesome route rate. He's sort of been victim of the revolving door at quarterback, but when Garbers has been out there, he's gotten pretty good opportunity. Seen a couple 7-target games for him, 5.6 targets per game on the year. I think Sturdivant's a great play at this price tag. 3,900 for him against USC is phenomenal. Logan Loya, he's a bit more expensive, but not by much. You can play Logan Loya. The big injury news for UCLA, sorry. I might have been calling them USC the whole time. If I have, I apologize. Talking about UCLA. But Cam Brown's been injured. He missed their last game entirely. The biggest beneficiary has been Ryan Cragen. Last 2 games, 82% of routes and 70% of routes. Ryan Cragen's all the way down here, the stone minimum, 3 targets and 4 targets. Nothing spectacular. But if Cam Brown misses, Ryan Cragen is your stone min play to open up your slate. USC, Caleb Williams, he's in the Bonix category. He runs a little bit, averages 297 yards per game. UCLA plays awesome defense. They have an amazing pass rush. Caleb Williams has a good implied team total despite this, so he's in play, but I would still rather straight up play Dillon Gabriel. It's a toss-up to me between him and Nix. I think I would go with Nix, but the team total difference I think is important. Yeah, I'm going to go with Nix over Caleb Williams too, so he'd be the third really expensive quarterback in my own personal rankings. Backfield's a timeshare. Marshawn Lloyd leads it. Austin Jones handles change of pace work. Marshawn Lloyd's not expensive, so I have some interest in him, but still just 12.2 touches per game. He does average 80 yards rushing, and he's somewhat involved as a receiver. In the pass catching room, Michael Jackson's been out for 2 straight games. They've benched some of their receivers. Mario Williams below 20% of routes. Dorian Singer hit the bench. I mean, who would have thought Dorian Singer hitting the bench? 20% route rate for Singer last game. Taj Washington, 80%. Brennan Rice, 60%. And it's still a rotation behind these guys, but instead of like Singer at 50%, it's now been Zachariah Branch and Deuce Robinson, their elite freshmen, at the expense of Singer and Williams, excuse me. So I think you can throw a dart on Deuce Robinson now. He's 3,300, 3 targets in back-to-back games, route rate rising at the expense of Singer and Williams. But I mean, the easy answer is just find your salary, get up to Rice or Washington. There's no discounts on USC. They're not going to project well. They just be contrarian stacking options. All right. Oklahoma State, Houston, 7-point spread in favor of the Cowboys. 59 total, so another good one. Both teams fast. Oklahoma State 42nd in pace. Houston 45th. Both teams pass heavy. They're right around 55% apiece. Alan Bowman, 7,100 is a fine price tag. The Houston defense is inept. They're strong up front, but they cannot cover in the secondary. Bowman, interestingly enough, had 3 interceptions last game, but only 2 turnover-worthy plays. Leon Johnson, please put your hands up and catch the ball. Anyway, Bowman is an interesting tournament play. Just the offense this Oklahoma State team runs. I'm fine with him. Ollie Gordon, ultimate bounce back spot. I mean, the interceptions and the ultimate negative game script he faced last week just completely crippled him. 8,800's getting stiff, but I mean, it's not too long ago where we saw him ripping off 200-yard games. Houston is terrible on defense. I mean, should be another good spot for Ollie Gordon. I don't think he's a clear priority in cash, given Gabriel and some of the elite QBs we have, but he's still a good play there. The receiving game, I mean, they can't adjust the prices on these guys quick enough. Rashad Owens at 5,600 is still a screaming value. 10.5 targets per game for him over the last 4. He now leads the team in receiving. I mean, Rashad Owens just cannot be stopped. Jaden Bray doesn't look like he's coming back. 3 games missed in a row. Same with Talon Sheetron. Blaine Green did return, but he barely played. So it's Rashad Owens, it's Brennan Presley, and it's Leon Johnson. Leon Johnson's also too cheap. 11 targets, 8 targets, and 11 targets over the last 3. I'll definitely be stacking OK State. As far as the Houston side goes, I think the leash is short on Donovan Smith. He's been benched multiple times now in the last couple games. He's got a good floor. 35 attempts per game, 240 yards passing, and then he has 341 rush yards. Oklahoma State's defense is also not good. They're allowing nearly 9 yards per pass attempt. If you guaranteed me Smith played every single snap, I would have a lot of interest in tournaments. Backfield's a 3-way committee. Parker Jenkins, Stacey Snead, Tony Mathis, no problem there. Just going to fade it. The receiving game, they lost number one receiver Matthew Golden, finally shut him down for the year. That solidifies opportunity for Samuel Brown, Joseph Manjack. And then the main wide receiver three has been Dalton Carnes. He does rotate a little bit with Stephon Johnson, Joshua Cobbs. They use tight ends occasionally. That's Mike O'Loughlin. But you've got a nice price tag on Carnes. I will just focus on him as my preferred punt play from this game. He's 3,400. He makes a lot of sense. The pay-ups, Manjack and Samuel Brown, are pretty efficient price-adjusted plays. All right, that does it for the DraftKings side of things. Let's continue with the FanDuel slate, and then we'll get to top fives. So this game is on FanDuel. It's Kansas State, Kansas, 9.5 point spread, 57.5 total. Kansas State 54th in pace, believe it or not. Kansas is 99th. Both teams pretty run heavy. Kansas State passes a little bit more at 46%. Kansas coming right in at 40%. Will Howard's very expensive on FanDuel, so he's not a preferred option for me, but he does run a lot. Very efficient passer. The receiving game, I think it's gotten a little more clear. It's Phillip Brooks, it's Ben Sano, it's Keegan Johnson, and then it's Jace Brown. They've just been using Jaden Jackson and RJ Garcia as rotational options at this point. The one thing that's positive about Kansas State is none of them are expensive. Brooks is 6,900. Sano is my preferred play. He's 63 on FanDuel. Keegan Johnson's 54, and Jace Brown is 52. I mean, you'll mix and match these Kansas receivers if you're using optimizers, anything like that. The run game, Giddens is a bit expensive. It's about a 60-40 committee between him and Ward. Ebbs and flows a little bit, but you could play, especially Ward for tournaments at 7K. Makes some sense there. On the Kansas side, looks like Jason Bean's going to give it a go. He has a very nice price tag at 9.2K on FanDuel. Kansas State's defense has been giving to better teams, and they've stifled some of the bad teams on these in this Big 12 conference. Bean has very good rushing equities, averaging over 4 yards per carry, 204 yards per game for Bean through the air. I mean, he barely played last game, so these routes and everything is skewed for him. But he's a great play. He's very cheap on FanDuel. The backfield is a 60-40-ish committee. When games are hyper-competitive, you see Neal a little more involved. He's pushed 20 carries in 3 straight games. Highshaw is going to hover right around that 10 mark. Neither are expensive. I prefer Neal. I think he's also a good play on FanDuel. Kansas in general is just cheap. The big news is the status of Luke Grimm, who allegedly is going to play. We'll see. But Kansas doesn't really throw frequently enough for me to have a lot of interest in these players. They're all in the same price range as the Kansas State guys, so I'd rather just straight up pivot over there than play like an Arnold, a Skinner. Fairchild also got banged up in the game, so watch his status. Washington, Oregon State, good game for FanDuel. We have a total of 62.5 points, 2.5 point spread in favor of Oregon State. May surprise some of you. We know what Washington does. They're not fast, but they run the air raid, 59% pass rate. Penix is pretty expensive over there, but he's not egregious. He doesn't run, but he's averaging 354 passing yards per game as Penix, just nasty passing numbers. You can stack him. And Dylan Johnson, they've really thrown their chips in on him. 17 carries, 26 carries, 23 carries. Very good pass game role. Dylan Johnson is one of the better running back plays on FanDuel, even against an Oregon State defense that's pretty good. Pass game, O'Dunes, Jalen Polk, and Jeremy Bernard are their top 3 receivers right now. Jalen McMillan returned. He only made it through a handful of snaps. I continue to say I will believe it when I see it with Jalen McMillan playing a full snap share. So I'm out on him. Jeremy Bernard is an awesome play at 6.6K. This Washington team is easy to navigate. You get every which way, expensive, cheap. Bernard, Polk, and O'Dunes all make a lot of sense. On the Oregon State side, offense is pretty neutered, similar to Notre Dame, 106th in pace, 45% pass rate. They don't ask Gajewski to do anything. He doesn't run a lot, designed at least. Their offensive line is very good, so he doesn't take like a ton of sacks either, but rushing floor is not very good. He has 153 yards there on the ground, averages 225 per game through the air. This team's not built to play from behind. So he's not really a great option for me. I'd rather play Bean. Damian Martinez is fine, though. I mean, this guy's averaging 17.3 touches per game. When they get up in contests, too, they are willing to just ride him. Fenwick is a change of pace back. It's like a 70-30 split. Damian Martinez is 8,500. Phenomenal price tag. And then along with Gajewski, not a ton of interest in the receivers. They're all a little bit expensive for my liking. Like Velling, he's lived off touchdowns. 7.4K is absurd. I'd rather play Jeremy Bernard, Kansas State receivers, Ben Sano, you name them. And then Bolden and Gold are a bit expensive for this matchup as well. We already named about 6 receivers that have better price-adjusted projections. Florida, Missouri, 11-point spread in favor of Missouri. 57.5 total is very good here. Florida is 81st in pace. Missouri's 80th. Florida has the high pass rate. Missouri's pretty balanced. Graham Mertz takes sacks. That's the biggest detriment to his game. He's actually very efficient as a passer, averaging over 8 yards per attempt. Nearly 275 yards per game through the air, but Missouri has a decent secondary. It's not going to be easy for him. The backfield's a 50-50 committee, Montrell Johnson and ETN. I'll say this, they are both extremely cheap on FanDuel. I imagine they're going to pop a little bit in projections, and I think you could throw darts depending on your constructions, but man, they're cheap. The receiving game, it's pretty clear. Ricky Pearsall, 1, Eugene Wilson, 2. We saw the return of Marcus Burke, and he cannibalized Khalil Jackson pretty badly, too. They almost split that wide receiver 3 role. Tight end is already a rotation. Arliss Boardingham has about a 55 to 60% route rate. When it's not him, it's Hayden Hansen. So I think it's pretty easy to focus on Pearsall and Eugene Wilson. Both pretty decent price-adjusted plays, averaging 9.5 and 9.3 targets per game over the last 4. Brady Cook, 10.2K is very nice for him. He has a nearly 35-point implied team total. He runs 228 yards. Averages 275 through the air. Very clear stacking option in Luther Burden. I don't think he's expensive enough. 98 yards per game for him. I mean, if you think he's still injured, which I think he's battling something, but at the same time, like, he's just by far the most talented player, and he's not that expensive. Theo Weiss, 7K is a good price tag on him. Mookie Cooper at 5,900. He plays every single snap with Brady Cook. I mean, very cheap price tag on Mookie Cooper. But the real story here is Cody Schrader playing like 99% of snaps lately. His touch counts in the last 2 games. Let's do last 3 games. 29, 25, 40. 40 touches, 4-0 for Cody Schrader last game. Florida allows 5.2 yards per carry. Florida's defense is horrific. Man, Cody Schrader is set up really well here. He's expensive on FanDuel, but it doesn't matter. And as you can see in DraftKings, holy smokes, 6.5K is way too cheap. Kentucky, South Carolina, 1-point spread in favor of Kentucky, 53.5 total. Kentucky super slow, 125th in pace, but they pass a lot, 53%. South Carolina, 30th in pace, 56% pass rate. I'd never played Leary. He just 206 yards per game, negative 40 rushing yards. What's the ceiling on him? Yeah, he's going to project okay because he's cheap, but there's opportunity costs. Playing Leary in a spot means you can't play Brady Cook or Bo Nix or whoever it is. Ray Davis has a really good workload when they're not slaughtering teams or getting slaughtered themselves. So 19 touches per game on the year, 93 yards, really good pass catcher, averages 3.3 targets per game over the last 4. No issues playing Ray Davis, even though he's a bit expensive on FanDuel. Receiving game is dicey. I mean, there's no real clear differentiator between Berrien Brown, Dane Key, and Tavian Robinson. I guess Berrien Brown's my favorite just because his price tag is much different at 5.5K on FanDuel, but he also leads the team in targets. That should be noted, but not going to be a preferred option. Rattler has been really good. I mean, Rattler actually is going to pop in projections at 8.2K. I have no issues playing him. Nearly 35 attempts per game, 287 yards, 64 rushing yards, which is unbelievable. He's taken 35 sacks. Rattler's in play, easy to stack. Leggett has 13 targets in back-to-back games. Amari and Brown, 5 targets in the last 2. And they're using Nick Harbor a lot. They're stud freshman. He's 5,100. Hasn't really resulted in a lot of targets, but he's really cheap. They do get back Trey Knox this week, so I think that kind of reduces Josh Simon. Not really interested there. The biggest news is Dak Joyner and Juju McDowell are out. I mean, Mario Anderson, he's probably going to have 20 touches. 6.8K is a laughable price tag. Tight spread, so they're not going to get blown out if it's plays to the spread. Awesome running back play. Excuse me, it's kind of hard to talk for an hour straight. If you can believe it or not, props to you guys for listening to this. Almost done, though. Texas, Iowa State, 7.5-point spread in favor of the Longhorns. 47 total. Texas, 61st in pace, 47% pass rate. Iowa State's 122nd with about a 50% pass rate. Quinn Ewers at 8,600 is going to – he's a decent price-adjusted play. Averages 278 yards per game. Doesn't run a ton. But stacking Ewers, I think, is fine. This game environment's just a little poor. The real news here is Jonathan Brooks out for the year. So we have CJ Baxter at 7.7K, another just elite play. Barely have seen Jaden Blue, Savion Red, or Keelan Robinson the last couple games. So I think this is the full CJ Baxter show. I'm going to be playing him on both sides. And then in the pass game, Xavier Worthy's really cheap at 7.2K. I'm not sure why they keep pricing him down. Target counts of 10, 14, 13. He makes sense as a one-off, just a really strong price-adjusted play. Jatavian Sanders, also 5,800. Very good play there. Iowa State, Rocco's Becht is 7K flat. I mean, he another neutered offense, 122nd in pace. He only throws the ball 28.5 times per game. He has 81 rushing yards, just no ceiling. It's a timeshare running back led by Eli Sanders. Cartevious Norton is the change of pace. Receiving game, Jalen Noel leads the group, 7.8 targets per game. Jaden Higgins is behind him, 5.8. Been rotating quite a bit recently. Ben Brahmer, don't be confused by this 7-target game. He's in a rotation at tight end with like 5 guys. No real interest in Iowa State. Next 2 games, Georgia State and LSU are both DraftKings only. So I think that does it for the night slate. Let's move to top 5s at the positions. I do not know what they're going to be, but I will pull it up right now. I have not looked at this. Ran this right before the show. So this will be news to you as it will to me. Excuse the filibustering. All right, here we go. DraftKings, QB. Number 1, Jordan McLeod. No surprise there. Love Jordan McLeod. Number 2 is Dylan Gabriel. I think both of them make a lot of sense. I think they'd be hard to play together in cash. But Ethan Garbers is 3rd. It's everything we love about the USC defense popping up there. Interestingly, Alan Bowman is 4. I think that's just a lot of the matchup. And Donovan Smith projects as 5. I think there's a lot of volatility with Donovan Smith. That's going to come down to how many snaps you think he plays. Again, I think the leash is pretty bad with him. And then right beyond that, usual suspects, you've got Beck, you've got Caleb Williams, you've got Nix. No real issues if you want to play those guys for tournaments. At running back, number 1 is Tyson Lawton. No surprise there, changing of the guard over Kalen Black. Number 2 is Jonah Coleman. I think there's a little bit of volatility there, just if you think Wiley's back. But, I mean, 5K for Coleman's a nice price tag. They're favored by a lot. Actually, excuse me, not by a lot, but they are favored. And then 3 and 4, Omarion Hampton, Bucky Irving. 5 is Audric Estime. Ollie Gordon comes in 6th if you want to know that. So you've got the 2 cheap guys, Lawton and Coleman, and then a mixture of studs right after that. At wide receiver, we go down to Elijah Surratt. It's JMU everywhere at the top, but that makes sense. We were talking about how cheap these JMU guys are. Number 2 is Dalton Carnes. He's 3.4K. Makes a lot of sense. That's your potential shootout. Leon Johnson and Rashad Owens are 4 and 5, or 3 and 4, excuse me. J. Michael Sturdivant comes in at 5. Drake Stoops, 6. Troy Omeire, 7. And then I guess we should talk about the best studs. Taj Washington actually pops for that category at 7K flat. But it's a lot of the Oklahoma receivers on top of Stoops. Farouk is really high. So that's a good game to stack overall. For FanDuel, quarterback position, even more games on this slate. So excuse me for the scrolling. Number 1's Dylan Gabriel over here. That makes a lot of sense. Number 2 is Carson Beck. We didn't touch on his FanDuel price, but he's 9.5K there. Very affordable. Caleb Williams is 3. Bonix is 4. What this tells me is, like, we talk about a million cheap receivers. It's just not that hard to pay up for these guys. So you kind of see eye-popping price tags. But and this goes back to the last couple of weeks. I've had no issues playing 2 studs at quarterback. It's actually, I think, pretty easy on these slates. So I have no issues paying up there. At wide receiver, or excuse me, at running back, Mario Anderson, 6.8K. He's the best price-adjusted guy here. Cody Schrader's 2 at 10.5. 3, CJ Baxter at 7.7. 4, Taj Brooks at 9.8. And 5, Damian Martinez at 8.5. For those of you wondering, Ollie Gordon is 6. Dylan Johnson is 7. I have no issues with those rankings. I agree with them. And, you know, Montrell Johnson's in the top 10, so we talked about the Florida backs. They are going to pop to save you some salary. Another way to get up to the expensive QBs. Wide receiver, this is going to be good. Jaleel Farouk is number 1 at 6.5K. Rashad Owens is 2 at 7. And then we've got Taj Washington, Drake Stoops, Xavier Worthy, no surprise there, Leon Johnson, Luther Burden to round things out. If you have a question, you want to know where someone else is ranked, please leave it below. You can also reach out to me on Twitter. I'm at Matt_Gajewski. Love doing these breakdowns for you guys. So thank you for watching. Kept it under an hour. We'll be back, I think, twice next week for Rivalry Week, Friday and Saturday. But until then, good luck, everyone. We'll see you next time.